All right, so let's introduce ourselves first before we just dive into our conversation, which is what you and I usually do anyway. So I'll let
Usually.
you introduce yourself first, and then I'll introduce myself.
Oh, sure thing. Hi everyone. I'm Natan Bradbury. I am a student and teacher of Kabbalah, quantum physics, psychology, Bushido, and Taoism. And I combine different aspects of those to create what I call the way of the mystic warrior, drawing on ancient sources for modern living.
I love that. I love that. And I am Reverend Joanne Angel Barry Cologne, your certified holistic personal trainer, intuitive healer, cosmic energy reader, medical astrologer, master of numerology, the creator of the Chakra Balance Numerology Cosmic Energy Forecast deck, founder of Holistic Fitness, and I work with women over 40, but I do work with men by referral. I blend the physical and mystical world together to help women, men also, release weight emotionally, physically, mentally, and spiritually. And today, Natada and I come together, as we often do when we're not recording, and we always say we should record because we share such amazing insight that I believe anyway, that would be beneficial to everybody, which is why we chose to come together today to share the topic of the contracts we, and I'm going to emphasize that word, we create. And it's time that we start taking responsibility for the contracts that we create and stop pointing our fingers at other people with the placement of shame or blaming in regards to someone else did this to me, as opposed to this is my contract and this is happening for me. So Todd, talk about that a little bit, and we're gonna bounce the conversation between the two of us. So I'm gonna hand the mic over to Natad for him to talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So let's start. Let's start at the beginning, right? We'll talk about reincarnation. So in the West, reincarnation is foreign, right? It's not talked about in the Christian world. It's not taught. There's really very little concept of understanding it in the Western world. However, in the East, with religions like Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, and Taoism, reincarnation is very, very much a fundamental part of those belief systems. So, with that in mind, I've had the opportunity to delve into it, to study it, to attempt to understand it, at least to the extent I do today, right? And so basically what happens, first of all, the soul, your actual soul, not your physical body, but your we'll call it your higher self, right? Is immortal, right? It's a being of pure energy. It was created a very long time ago, millions of years or thousands of years, depending on your perspective, right? When God created the world, so your soul is ancient, right? It's very, very old. This is not your first time here. This is not your first incarnation on this earth. So as we go through all these cycles of reincarnation, and we'll talk about why, yeah, in a little bit, but
And actually,
um,
before you
oh,
dive
sure,
further,
sure.
just on that word reincarnation, because again, as you and I have discussed, obviously behind the scenes, not everybody believes in reincarnation.
Right.
So if someone doesn't believe in reincarnation, but here you and I are chatting about our contracts and our soul that has been living for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, theoretically that pretty much is saying that we've all been reincarnated, even though people may not believe that they have. So again, I wanna put it out there that we are not here, Natal and I are not here to get you to change your belief. I mean, if you don't believe in reincarnation, you just don't believe in reincarnation, and that's fine. So this may not be for you, but at the same token, it may hit something, it may resonate with something where you might be curious enough to sit here and want to listen to what Natasha and I do share about this whole philosophy of reincarnation, and that our souls have lived for hundreds and hundreds of years, which is why we know a lot of what we do know without knowing why we know what we know. And I know sometimes it's like, huh? What was that you just said? So I just wanted to throw that in there. And this is what we're going to do between each other, is we're going to interrupt each other often when we're saying things, because when the thought comes on, we sort of can't hold back. We have to go right for it. So go ahead again with what you were saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to note real quick that not just hundreds of years, but thousands. We're talking go back to millennia, right? Since the very first human beings came to inhabit this planet, right? So that's how far back your soul goes. Okay. And if you don't believe that, that's fine. And maybe this lesson isn't for you. But for those of us who are familiar with the topic, who understand it, as your soul goes through all these different incarnations, or even you can call them, manifestations, right? Because we're all part of the singularity. We're all part of the one, and we're all part of God, right? So it's a manifestation rather than a creation. But as you go through all these cycles, there's different missions, different purposes. You come to accomplish different things. In one cycle, you may be born as a man. In one cycle, you may be born as a woman. In one cycle, you may be born as a dog. In another cycle, maybe you're a hawk, right? So there's all kinds of different reasonings and different purposes as you go through all these cycles, with each having its own specific mission for you to accomplish. And now is where we get into the topic of soul contracts, right? So if you, and it's very, very interesting, if you read some of the stories of children that claim to have lived past lives, some of the details are so profound and very, very detailed. It's very, very hard to dismiss that right out of hand, right? So if you don't believe at all in reincarnation and you want to explore and you want to see what these children are saying, I invite you to go check it out. There's an entire message board, for example, of kids who were born after 9/11, people who died on 9/11 and then came back, and they remember their past lives. There was one
Now,
specific
now,
lady.
would you say, and this is it's so interesting you say that, because it's a question that's just popping into my head right now. Would you say or believe, and we have no facts to prove this, but maybe we do. Would you believe that some of those people who died in 9/11 had actually reincarnated and came back as the children that were born after 9/11?
Oh, absolutely. That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
There was one case in particular that really struck me, was one that was a firefighter, and they did a little bit of research. He knew about his old engine company that he served under. He knew the number of the hook and ladder. He knew that he was actually fire rescue, and what he was trained in. I mean, just everything really, really added up. Um, Pretty amazing, really, really amazing story. So now that's all for me. That's proof of reincarnation, right?
Yes,
Other
of course.
than our own
Yes.
experience. But now getting into your purpose. Okay, so you come back and now you've been reincarnated. And generally speaking, as you start to get older, we'll say 8, 9, 10 years old, you start to forget, right? All the things that you lived and experienced in your past life, you start to forget. There's a very good reason for that, because if you continue living in your past life experience, you're never going to accomplish what you're here to do today,
Exactly.
right? There's a very, very good reason for that. You're not here to continue living in that past life experience, right? That's not
Well,
what you're
yeah,
here.
because now you have a whole new set of contracts that you're here to
Bingo.
fulfill in regards to the prior life, that at that point, when you passed on, you've completed that contract. And now you come
Right.
back. Like it's like that whole concept where people sit back and say, well, if I don't complete my lessons that I'm here to do in this lifetime, that I have to come back. Now, in theory, I don't, even though, yes, I used to be the one who would say that as well, that if you don't complete what you came here to do, you will end up coming back. But I think the
Right,
process of it's not that you come back as the same version of yourself, you come back
right.
as a different version in regards to some new lessons that you come to learn, in addition to some of what you didn't complete in your past life that you have to complete in this lifetime.
Right. Yeah, that's very true. And yes, I do believe some of that mission carries over, but now you're being given a new environment, right? You have a
Yes.
new set of circumstances. You have a new family that you're born into. You have new parents, a different environment you're raised up in, right? So everything is different in this cycle as opposed to your previous cycle.
Yes.
And that's where the contracts come in, is what a lot of people don't realize. And you come to understand this listening to the stories of reincarnation, is that you choose your set of circumstances, right? You choose your family, you choose your experiences, all before you come into this physical dimension, right? As a soul, in, we'll call it, you can call it heaven, you can call it the waiting place, the resting place, whatever your preference is, right? But in that resting place, right? You choose how you're going to be born into this world, right? You
Yes.
choose what your life circumstances are going to be. You choose all of that. And by doing that, by making those choices, you are creating what you call contracts, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Um, a contract to me, it's almost limiting, right, in the physical sense, but to put it into a frame of mind that we can understand, basically you're making an agreement before God, before the creator, right, whatever you want to call it, that you're going to come into this life and you're going to be born into this family. You're going to go through whatever you experience, right? And that's a hard pill to swallow. I'm going to be honest. Sometimes we go through, I'm going to be very frank, we go through some really bad shit,
Yes.
right? We
Yes.
really, really do.
Well,
Um,
before you even go further with that statement, because again, I've been studying under this amazing astrologer, and she has chosen to release the words bad and good,
mm,
negative or positive, because as humans, we have to define everything as bad or good. Where I've come to
sure.
learn that the lessons that we do experience that might seem like they're bad, it's just that those are more challenging lessons, which means there's something that we need to really pay attention to. Whereas if it wasn't as challenging, we wouldn't pay attention to it as much, and therefore we miss the lesson. It's like
Sure.
when you go into school and your teacher says to the class, okay, there's going to be a test tomorrow. She calls it a test. Now, theoretically, when you come in the next day to take that test, everything that's on that test is everything you studied over a period of time. Now you are just testing your knowledge to see what you've actually obtained. And some people, when they hear the word test, they get really nervous and it's like, oh, on, this is a really bad thing. And other people, it doesn't phase them. So again, it's the same concept on our experiences that we have in life, that yes, there will be some things that's going to be more challenging that we might call, oh, this is a bad thing,
Sure.
or we just look at it as, okay, we have a challenge ahead of us, we have something we need to really pay attention to, and what can we learn from this experience that we label as bad.
Mhm. Sure. Sure. And I think you really drove home something there, is that it is part of the reason we go through those experiences, we have those experiences, is because we are to learn from them, right? We have to take the lesson from them and then turn around and use them as fuel, right? A lot of people get stuck in, oh man, I had this really traumatic experience. I went through abuse when I was a kid, or I went through physical, verbal abuse, sexual abuse, right? Whatever it is, we have that experience and then we get stuck in it.
Yes.
And when we get stuck in it and we hold on to those emotional experiences, and I'm going to digress for just a moment, but that ends up getting stored in your body, right?
Yes.
And it gets stored in your body. And then over time, that tends to build up, and it causes, it's actually a proven fact that stress is the #1 cause of disease, right?
Yes,
So those emotional experiences get stored in your body as stress, and then it manifests in all kinds of forms of disease, right?
yes, yes. And there's three layers when we think about it. Before it turns into a disease, it starts out as pain. The
Mm,
emotional connection that we are not connecting with shows up in our body as physical pain. That eventually we avoid the physical pain, we pretend it doesn't exist, or we whatever it is, and then eventually over time that physical pain eventually ends up being an illness that will get us to stop, but we don't pay attention to why we had to stop. There's a reason why that illness made us took us to that place to quiet ourselves down, but when we still don't pay attention to it, then it ends up being something bigger, which is the disease. That now it's like, okay, it's some of the work that I do with clients is I always ask the client, when did this start taking place? And how old were you? And what was the actual experience that you can remember? Because again, the key word is remembering and then being able to peel that a little bit further. Because sometimes we either choose not to remember because it's just too horrific, or
right,
we've suppressed it at the very time when it was happening to protect ourselves. We don't do it because we don't want to remember. It's a protection mechanism,
right,
coping
exactly.
mechanism for that matter. So yes, and it does show up in the body in regards to the emotions that we suppress, or the emotions we just choose, like, okay, we're just going to push this away and
Yep,
avoid it as much as possible. But eventually over time, we can't avoid it.
exactly. And I think that's really where it gets to, taking those experiences and remembering that, okay, yes, you may register that as a really, really bad experience, but the entire reason you went through that, well, #1, you chose it, right? You actually chose it before you were born. So you have to take ownership of that, right? But you also need to extract the lesson from it. And in order to extract the lesson, you have to, in Taoism, it's called becoming the observer. So, what that means is you have to detach the emotion associated with that event, step outside of yourself, and take a look back and say, okay, if I look at the situation objectively without the emotion, what can I learn from this? How can I use this, to help other people? Right.
Yes. Well, first they have to, before they even get to learning what they could do to help other people, how can they learn the lesson for themselves so they
Right,
can
exactly.
heal? Because again, before we can actually ever support somebody else, we have to go through our own journey. And interesting enough, what we'll learn, as Natada and I have learned through our journeys, is anything that we're experiencing, the challenges that we're experiencing, we are actually experiencing it because there's people out there, such as yourselves, who are watching this, who are experiencing something similar and need a teacher. Because we're all teachers, but we're all students, and we're all here to help each other get to that layer of, oh, wow, this person is talking to me based on what they experience. And now they feel like, oh, I'm not the only one going through this,
Right.
and going through that whole process of whatever our journeys are. Because with every healer, I mean, if you sit down and you ask an average healer, okay, so what got you started on your journey, most of us are going to say some sort of trauma that we experience, an emotional trauma or something more significant that led us down the road of, as I call it, the spiritual journey, evolving and getting to that place where it's like, okay, so this is happening and there's a reason why it's happening. So now I need to figure out what it is I'm supposed to learn from whatever it is that's happening.
Right. And I want to, add on to that, that, when we speak of a healer, right, we're not just talking in the spiritual sense, but I also, I've met many, many people throughout my journey, psychologists, therapists, medical doctors, right? Generally the reason that they enter the field is they went through a traumatic experience, and then they decided, well, okay, so I had this experience, but let me turn around and use this to help other people, right? Let
Exactly.
me use my trauma, my traumatic experience to make a difference in the world. So I think that's what really makes the fundamental difference when we're talking about soul contracts and we're talking about our experiences here is um, it's very, very easy to get caught in the cycle of, oh, I've got PTSD from this, or I've got PTSD from that, or I've had the trauma of this or the trauma of that. And we're not negating those experiences in any way, right? But stop being a victim.
Yeah.
Stop letting that situation control your life, because it was never meant to control your life. It was meant to direct your life.
Exactly. And again, coming back into, as we spoke on before, about the emotions and it being suppressed and showing up in the body, the different diagnoses that doctors give us, whether it be the PTSD, it's a diagnosis, which then gives you the ability to research what it actually means on a metaphysical perspective,
Sure.
and then to tap into the root cause of where it started from. And then in the everyday world of the now, we can then sit back and review, okay, well, it started from here, and when I experience situations that trigger that emotion, because that's what it is, that's the word of 2022, 2021, 2022. That's the fad. I'm kind of curious to see if we come up with a new one for 2023, but it triggers something from our past. And it's only triggering something from our past because there's something in our present that it's almost like the alarm is going off to say, okay, here's something that you have to think about, reflect on, this emotion that you didn't address at the time. So now it's surfacing here at this moment. Let's address this emotion, as opposed to a constantly, and I'm going to use this word, my words, blaming it on the diagnosis.
Right.
Because we can sit back, every one of us can sit back and say we have some sort of something, and fall under that label of the diagnosis, or we could turn around and say, yes, i was I was diagnosed. This is the medical explanation behind it. Here's the metaphysical explanation of it. So now what am I going to do with both of them, and how can I use both of those definitions to help me really get to that place of understanding the the root of the emotion that I need to now address.
Right.
And that, I think, is the bigger thing, because the emotion is the part of the soul's contract that we're here to work on. So we can start to move forward, and not to sit and, which as humans we do a lot, place blame on the other person. So for example, if Natad said something to me that triggered me, all of a sudden I'm going to be blaming the Todd for whatever it is, and get really upset with him, as opposed to taking accountability of, okay, so he said something that turned on the light, which is the trigger, that emotionally made me uncomfortable. But all he did was tap into something that was already there.
Right.
And now I have to sit and reflect on what is that connected to. It has absolutely nothing to do with Natad. In fact, I can actually go back and say to him, "Thank you so much for bringing this up for me, because
Right.
obviously there's something I have to work on." Otherwise, what we do is, if I don't work on it at the time that Natad turns on the light for me, somebody else is going to show up in my path.
Yep.
It could be another friend, it could be a family member, it could be a coworker, it could be your boss, whatever it is, and they're going to spark that light again. And then you're going to have that same experience. And before you know it, you're getting mad at a lot of different people, and all they're doing is actually striking that light to come on for you, to help you tap into that contract that you're here to fulfill.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And it's funny, as you were talking, I was thinking about cancel culture and we're going to cancel this because it offends me. We're going to cancel that because it offends me. Well, instead of doing that, and instead of reaching back into the past or into the present and canceling something or someone, let's take a look at ourselves and see, okay, what is coming up, right? Okay, I'm feeling angry about this. Why am I feeling angry? What anger is the first level of pain, right? So if you're feeling anger, good. Dig into it and then start exploring it. Okay, where is this coming from? Why am I feeling this way? Right? Ask yourself all those questions as you go on this journey of self-exploration. And as you do, bit by bit, you're going to peel back the first layer, then the second, and the third, until you get all the way down to the root. And then once you get to the root, you're like, ah, okay, now I know what the root issue is, and then I can determine whether that root issue is true or false.
Yes. And even sometimes what we think the root issue is, sometimes it's not. Sometimes you have to even go a bit deeper than the
Right.
root, because
Yep.
sometimes it's a deeper layer. As we've said, this is about, we've carried energies from lifetimes ago that we might actually, it may be not so much about getting to the root cause of why are we angry, but what is that anger supposed to be teaching us? Is it supposed to be teaching
Right.
us maybe the opposite of anger? What is the
Right.
opposite of anger?
Right. Peace.
Yeah. So if in fact we're holding on, we get angry when a situation occurs, well, how can we flip that around? And rather than staying focused on the anger, how can we move into a space of peace? And for some people, being angry is easy for them.
Oh,
It's
of course.
it's comfortable for them to be angry, because when we think about the word anger, the emotion anger, the other flip side to anger is fear. So when someone's
Mm,
angry, it's easier for them to say they're angry at somebody or something than for them to say they're afraid of someone or something. Because
right.
anger is more like a more masculine, like I'm in charge. Fear is
Right.
more feminine and like I'm vulnerable.
Yes. Yes. Exactly.
But at the same token, it's like, okay, the opposite of anger, as we've just established, is peace. So if you were to let go, or if you did get to the root cause of your anger, if there was such a thing, and you came to that realization, okay, now I know what I'm angry about. Well, you know what you're angry about. What are you willing to do about it? Are you willing to let that anger go and move into a space of forgiveness so
Mm,
you can have the peace? Or does
right.
that anger give you that ammunition to, or motivate you to do things? Because sometimes people hold on to that because it motivates them to do something, or motivates them not to do something. It gives them permission. There's another woman who I worked with about 3 years ago. Her term that she used to use is, what's the payoff? What is the payoff of holding on to anger as opposed to allowing yourself to have the peace? And the payoff would be, what does this allow you not to do? If you're angry, it means you're going to stop yourself from being involved with that person. So you isolate yourself, as opposed to just maybe having the ability to say, well, I just don't want to do that today. And some people have a challenging time saying no. Oops, where'd we go? All right, I lost him for the moment. He'll be back. But like I was saying, when he comes back, I'll continue with him. Some people have a challenging time saying no. So they'd rather revert back to something that makes them angry, or even for that matter, some people might actually start up an unnecessary disagreement so they can be angry again, which then gives them permission not to have to do whatever it is that they were going to do. So rather than just saying, well, I'm not interested in going, or I don't want to do this, they might actually pick a fight to allow them to be angry and give them permission not to have to do something. So there's a payoff. And that might be something you might want to ask yourself as well. What is the payoff after you've done the work, let's say you've gotten to that root cause, if there's even such a thing, what is your payoff? Just staying angry. What is the payoff to constantly blaming somebody else? What is the payoff for being in that space of not wanting to fulfill your contract? And as Natada and I were saying, hopefully he ends up coming back. When someone crosses over and reincarnates, understanding that you may reincarnate in this lifetime with a family member that maybe in the past life you were, let's say, a parent to that person, where in this lifetime you come back as being their sibling or being their spouse. And that itself, because you do carry the energy of the past life, you may still have some of that energy within your system that you may in this lifetime show up. Let's say in the past life you were the parent, and this life you come back as the child, you may feel the need to control or take or I guess the word would be control the situation, as opposed to actually just being the child, where you sort of take over, you take on the responsibilities. And that's just due to, again, the past life contract that you had with this person who is now your parent, who in your past life, you were their parent. So there's many reasons to why different situations occur in contracts, in the relationships we have with one another, and really getting to understand the lesson, the connections, and the contracts you have with the different people in your lives. We all are connected in one way or another. We all have a contract with each other in one way or another. Contracts can be a very short period of time, and contracts can be a very long period of time. And the idea of it is to be in that space and energy of knowing that there's a lesson that you're here to fulfill. And a bigger part of that lesson to fulfill is being able to step into your soul's purpose, whatever that soul's purpose might be for you. And every one of us has a very individual soul's purpose, an authentic soul's purpose. There are no two people in this world that share the same gift, I'm going to call it, shall we say, the same gift. Every one of us has our one unique something that we are here to do in regards to the soul's contracts that we have with each person we come in contact with. And I think I'm going to leave it with that. And I was sort of hoping that he was going to come back. Let me see if I can reach him and find out if he is having trouble getting back on. So give me a second. And then we're going to go. Just going to wait to see if he's going to pop in. But this whole conversation about the contracts we create, the most important thing here that we have to come to an agreement on, that I would like us to come to an agreement on, is that we recognize that we, W-E, we create these contracts. We create these contracts way before we take our first breath. We decide who our parents are going to be. We decide who our siblings are going to be. We do this. We do this based on the contracts that we have. And I know I find it extremely fascinating when I can find out that, let's say, I might have a sibling that in my past life was more of a older figure in past life and came back in this life as my sister, which makes it really interesting and then helps me to better understand the dynamics between that relationship. So I invite you to become curious enough to find out the different types of relationships you have with family members. And you're probably wondering, how can you find out the contracts that you shared with each of your family members through past life? And I know for myself, do an Akasha record reading, you can open up the Akasha records, have a facilitator do that for you to discover the different relationships you have, the karmic contracts, I'm going to call them, and just define what the level of relationship was in past life with each person. And this way here it can help you better understand the lesson, and also get to that place to just become curious of everything and anything you're experiencing, everything and anything you've experienced, and what it is you're going to learn about yourself. Because that's the key component here, is what can you learn about you through your journey on this, in what we call life, this world, this earth energy. What can you learn about yourself, the different contracts you have? I know for me, one of the most challenging things that I had to come to terms with to really understand is friendships. Understanding that sometimes people part way in friendships for no apparent reason at all. And at least that's what I thought. And then I realized, and I learned and realized that when both parties' contracts have ended for that period of time, we part ways. And that's what happens with friendships. That's what happens with any type of relationship when the contract has ended. And contracts may end permanently, or contracts may end temporarily. And then for whatever the reasons are, that person may end up coming back, or you end up coming back into that person's life on the next chapter. I like to look at this process as a book. A book. And thinking about books, we think about a book has multiple chapters. And in the chapters in the book, not every character is going to show up in every chapter. Therefore, because of not every character shows up in every chapter, it may mean that for that particular chapter, that person and you don't have a lesson to work on in that particular chapter. But that doesn't necessarily mean that person is permanently gone. It just means that that person is not there in that chapter. Down the road, that person may end up joining back into the book again and coming in as the same character they were before, or a different character. And that's how I would really like you to think about your contracts in reference to when relationships part ways and when relationships come back together, whether it's family relationships, business relationships, friendships, whatever it is. Natalia, you here with us?
I sure am. Sorry about
Perfect.
that. Sometimes when I'm
Perfect.
on video, it crashes.
Oh,
So
okay. All right. So I guess for now, we're just going to see your name and not you. Is that correct?
just for the time being.
Okay,
Yep.
that's perfect. What I was sharing with everybody was I went into the conversations on how from past life, we may have a family member that might have been, let's say, a sibling in a past life. And in
Right.
this lifetime, they may show up as a parent, or the reverse way, where in a past life, we might have been the parent. And in this lifetime, our parents, who our children were, are now our parents. And that happens too,
Yep.
which then helps
Sure
us to
does.
better understand some of why people react and act in a maybe a more controlling way, or want to take over, be in charge. And then understanding that, just like books, every book has a chapter, and
Yep.
not every chapter is going to include the same characters.
That's absolutely true. It's very interesting to me to talk about this topic, but my grandfather, of blessed memory, he passed away in 2014, and within a short time, he he came back into the family as one of my sister's sons. So I've actually had that experience. It's very, very interesting to me. It's very fascinating. And sometimes I think as parents, we have this child born to us, and we think, oh well, we need to control them, and we need to, oh man, they're really stubborn, or they really want to do things their own way. Well, that's because they do have some memory of being an adult and having that experience, and sometimes it's frustrating to them. Now they're a child again, and they're unable to do those things for themselves.
Exactly. Exactly. So I think a good takeaway today could be a matter of moving into a space of compassion and ease for one another, because we really do not know, understand, or I'm going to use the word know again, know what each and every one of us are experiencing, what we've experienced, what we are thinking, what triggers us, and the different contracts that we do have. Like, I know for me, because I have an Aquarius moon energy and I'm analytical and I like to research, and it's really curious to me to want to know the different contracts that I have with the different relationships that I have. Now, I
Right.
also spoke, as you were off camera, that how one, and maybe you have another way as well, how one can find out about their past life experiences. And I know Akasha records are one way of going about it. Is there another way that you would be able to talk to us about, or is that the way you would go about it too?
Absolutely. There's a few other ways, right? So, one, I want to introduce a caveat here. The what is called the Akashic records. Um, I believe it was Carl Jung called the collective unconscious. So, if you think of it, and to put it into modern terms and computer terms, think of it as a massive database of a record of every experience of every being born on this planet since the beginning, right? That's essentially what the Akashic records, or the collective unconscious, is. And knowingly or unknowingly, we tap into it on a regular basis. That's why people say that they receive insight. That's where prophecy comes from. That's where the spiritual community today likes to call it downloads, right? So there's all different terms for it, but basically what you're doing is you're tapping into the that record, that database, or that collective unconscious, and you're accessing these other experiences. And now I'm going to throw a loop in here. Is what we call a past life is actually a concurrent life experience in another dimension.
Interesting.
So it's actually, that experience is actually occurring now in a different time and space.
Mm. Now, as you say that, it brings me back to a conversation that you and I have had, oh my God, months and months ago, in regards to our frequencies and
Right.
in regards to people who cross over. And
Hmm.
I know that you and I have had this conversation where people we know, and suddenly, like, that person may be in our life and we see them on a regular basis, and then all of a sudden, obviously the paths disconnect,
Right.
and it's like we just don't see them again. And it's like,
Right.
wow, it's like the world, we already know the world is not that big. It's like it really is a small world. I
Right.
mean, every one of us, connect in one way or another, but yet
Exactly.
we don't see every person that we've had relationships with in the past. And a lot of that, as Todd and I have spoken about, is the frequency. The
Right.
frequencies, because we're not all on the same frequency. And I guess
Right.
in a sense, it's a good thing that we're not all on the same frequency. As, for
Right.
example, those who have crossed over, they're on a much higher frequency than us because they're no longer in their shell, which is their body. So
Right. Yep.
many of us can't see them because we can't see without the shell. Of course, those of us who are intuitive and have access our gifts are capable of seeing beyond what's in front of us.
Right.
But that frequency of knowing that, okay, If a person is no longer in your life, it just means they're not on the same frequency as you.
Right, right. That's I really like how you put that. And just to backtrack a little bit, when we talk about frequency, we have to have a fundamental understanding of the mechanics of the universe, right? So I believe it was Nikola Tesla that said, or maybe it was even Einstein, but one of those two brilliant minds said, when we talk about things, everything is an energy form, right? And so with each energy form, it comes with a specific wave and a specific energy vibration, which then comes out to a frequency.
Yes.
Right. So everything operates at a different frequency. So say, for example, there's a tree in front of you. Okay, well, that tree is vibrating at a different frequency than, say, your pets, your cats or your dogs, or even, you or your friends or your relatives, right? So everything is constantly vibrating at a different frequency. Now, when we talk about soul contracts and we talk about human beings and relationships, is oftentimes different people will come into your life to help you with different aspects of your soul's journey in this life.
Yes. Yes, exactly. And I think that's like the perfect end for this is to leave it on there, because as Natasha and I said when we started today's conversation, it's like this is like part one of multiple conversations that Natasha and I have together. And when we are being called to, we'll come back and share some more information on the different contracts, the souls contracts that every one of us are here to share. And like Natasha and I mean, Natasha, how long do you and I know each other now? Is it 3 years?
I think it's right about 3 years. Yeah, hard to believe. Wow.
Because I think we met right when the pandemic started, right?
Yeah, right about there.
Yeah.
Right about
Yes, yes. And it's so interesting because Natasha and I have never met in person.
Nope.
We've only met we've obviously only seen each other through the this amazing technology called Zoom,
Right.
where we've actually met that way. But because of what we've all experienced with the pandemic 3 years ago, our contracts that we all have, apparently Natasha and I were meant to meet. There was
Yeah.
a contract we had. So as I look at it, again, my analytical brain, it's like, okay, well, something needed to happen in order for Natasha and I to meet.
Mm.
Otherwise, I mean, in my radar, I didn't see myself going to Texas. And I don't think Natasha saw himself coming to New York.
Nope.
At least not in the time frame when we needed to do the work that we needed to do. So again, if you're like me, analytical, think about all the new relationships you now have based on the last 3 years of what's taken place with the entire world that has given us access to each other for these souls contracts that we do have.
Right.
Everything happens for a reason. And I know that theoretically there are lots and lots of people out there who are still really very I don't know what the word would be, but annoyed based on what's taken place in the last 3 years and all the changes that we've experienced. But everything that happens, there's a reason for it. And it happens for us to do the things that we need to do based on the contracts that we have. And we never really know the different contracts we have with different people until we actually meet them. Now, Natasha, do you remember how you and I met?
I know we met through Facebook. I don't remember exactly.
Yes. Well, I don't exactly remember the exact storyline, but I do remember that we met through a mutual acquaintance, and he posted something on Facebook. You commented, and then I commented based on what you commented on. And from there, we had a conversation.
That
We
sounds
pulled
about right.
we pulled away from the neutral contract, the neutral person that we both know, and we came together to have a conversation based on that one thing he talked about in his group. And I was like, oh, wow, based on what you commented on, I responded back. And there was the contract right then and there. And here it is 3 years later, Todd and I are still having these amazing conversations that, I mean, there were times where when we do chat together, obviously not on recording, we just sit back and say, wow, we should have recorded this conversation.
Yes.
Because they're so interesting. For one, they're intense, and I know when I end a conversation with Natal, I always end the conversation with more wisdom than I started the conversation with, because I learned so much from Natal. And it's just knowing and having that ability to actually have a conversation that with someone that A, is like-minded,
Right.
and B, that we can share this conversation, because there's not many people that I can sit down and have a conversations about in regards to souls contracts, and that we create our own contract, and that we're willing to take accountability for a lot of the things that we've experienced. Is that true for you, Nadad?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there was a time, I remember a time in my life where I wouldn't talk about this with anyone because they would look at me like I'm crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember that well.
Yes, yes, yes. So, Nadad, I want to thank you so much for being here today and sharing your wisdom. And I'm sure we're going to do this again, because again, we have so much to talk about, and based on whatever we do talk about when we're not recording, we'll then decide from there, oh, you know what, we need to have this conversation and share it out with the world. So we're gonna end the recording here. And Todd, if they need to reach you in regards to all the work that you do, how can they do that?
I definitely recommend looking up my profile on Facebook. I do respond to that. I have a couple of Facebook groups going, the Conscious Warrior and the I think it's the Empowered Feminine or the Empowered Women, which either one of the two.
And do you have a email address that they can reach you if they want to reach out for
Oh,
questions?
yeah, absolutely. You can reach me at email. So it's going to be Natan, Natan dot Bradbury, Bradbury @gmail.com.
There you go. Excellent. And for anyone who's looking to reach me, my email is healingwithin76@gmail.com. You can also check out my website, which is very simple, holistic with a W, fitnessny.com. All my services are there. And Natasha and I will be back at another time to share some more wisdom with you regarding our contracts and everything else in between there. So thank you so much for watching. Until next time, we'll be back.
All right.